Hi, everybody. This is a very brief review of some concepts in the political spectrum. There's reading attached to this week's work, and I thought a review of the sort of like the major principles of that reading would be very helpful when understanding that reading. Since it's being recorded, I encourage you to take a couple of notes, but you can pause and stop as you see fit. So left and right wing are far more complicated than what's presented here. This is just an introduction to make sure that you're kind of used to the concepts, but they get more nuanced and complicated the more detailed it gets. So we're going to start with left wing. Like reading, we'll go left to right. The most extreme left is communism. So communism is a system that does not believe in private property. Everything is owned by the states. The state meaning the country. Communist countries believe in economic rights, so right to a job, right to food, and right to housing. Right to free education is another example. So if you lived in a communist country, you couldn't own a house, your parents couldn't own businesses, they would all be owned by the state. But you're guaranteed a job, you're guaranteed a place to sleep, and you're guaranteed food. The problem, though, is you don't get to choose any of those things. If you have a sort of like, a good skill in science, chances are you'll end up being a scientist. But if you upset them politically, you may not get that opportunity. You don't get to choose. So the quality of housing, the quality of food, the quality of the job is questionable, but you do have those rights. What they don't do is respect political rights, freedom of press, voting, transparency, and human rights. Most communist countries did have voting. However, you could vote for the Communist Party or you could vote for the Communist Party. Most people ended up voting for the Communist Party. So it was voting, but not really in the democratic principles that we understood or we studied earlier last week. Communists, for the most part, are totalitarian. They control everything. Historic examples are Soviet Union, Cuba, and China. China is theoretically a communist country currently. Soviet Union broke down and it's now Russia, and Cuba is no longer communist either, or only quasi-communist. Historical leaders are Stalin, Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong. So Stalin was in charge of communist Soviet Union for during World War II and post-World War II. Fidel Castro was the communist leader in the 1960s, 70s of Cuba, and Mao Zedong was the communist leader of China post-World War II. If we move in closer to the center, the other left wing are socialist democracies. They respect political rights but believe in significant economic support such as free healthcare, free education, free childcare, and workers' rights. I put bracket unions. It could be really anything. It could be like just really good legislation, a really high minimum wage, really good like health and safety legislation, and support for workers. Historic and current examples are like Sweden, Finland, and modern day Germany would kind of fit under this. They also have like publicly funded or pension plans as well for workers. So they believe in democratic rights, but they have a lot of like supports, economic supports that support their citizens. For right wing, we'll start at the most extreme right is fascism. Fascism is a type of government that supports big business and wealthy with very little support for political rights. Examples: Germany. I mean, talking about fascist Germany, which is Nazis. Italy during World War II, and Argentina, Pinochet. Historic leaders are Hitler, Pinochet, and Mussolini. So there was again not very many political rights, but they supported sort of like large businesses and stuff like that, and ended up kind of controlling the economy as well, but supported private businesses, money, and investment. Libertarian is a more moderate form of right wing. I believe the market determined value and the correct distribution of resources, so that's closer to the center of right wing. Historic countries, USA and England. I'm talking historic USA and historic England, like in the 19th century, or actually 1980s. Sorry, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan believed in these ideas. Um, so they were in the 1980s that shifted these economies more to the right, and they were further to the center or left. The center. So look, these are democracies that have some aspects of right and left wing. For example, a country that is democratic and has capitalism but offers some social programs for education and healthcare. Historic and current examples is Canada. We are somewhere in the center. Now, it depends who's in control of our country. We veer from center right to center left, but we stick pretty much to the center. So we have capitalism. People don't have a right to a job. There's a discrepancy between wealthy and poor. People can own their own houses, own their own businesses, own their own, equity and capital. But also we have free education and healthcare. However, there are also limitations to that free education and healthcare. Free education does not include university, where it does in some socialist countries like Sweden and Finland, includes free university and college. For healthcare, there are some limitations. For example, prescriptions and dental care are not free in Ontario. Both have to be paid for out of pocket or with private health insurance, whereas in socialist countries, both those services would be offered free. So we have aspects of both right and left wing, which means Canada, depending on who's in charge of it, is somewhere in the center. Authoritarian. This is more up and down than left or right. This is a system of governments also known as totalitarian. There is little to no democratic rights. Pretty much authoritarian governments or totalitarian governments are in control of the entire economy, social and political control. You don't get to vote. Usually, you don't get to choose who your job is. The government runs the economy. So like the Soviet Union had a 5-year plan, for example. They're like, we're going to manufacture this many things. We're going to farm these things. So it was all centrally controlled by the state. It determined who's going to control what, including social control. What's going on in schools, who's going to go to schools, what sort of clubs could you join, what sort of music could you listen to, what sort of people can you hang around, what religions were acceptable. All of that was part of control, and all of that was part of authoritarian. Historic countries, Germany and Soviet Union, and then Stalin and Hitler. Notice Stalin is usually communist and Hitler's fascist. So on the left and right wing scale, they are totally opposite ends. However, they both have a very similar system of governments, even though the underlying ideology behind those systems of government is totally different. So this is a system of governance which allows the maximum choice, social, economic, and political. I give examples, early USA, like 19th century and Paris Commune. Jefferson, one of the first presidents of the United States, was all about individual liberty and giving the individual the maximum amount to choose. So you can do pretty much anything you want to, so long as it doesn't harm other people. And so the idea is like we try to like maximize the amount of individual liberty you have. And Milton is an example of that. That's more like a right-wing libertarianism or laissez-faireism. And then the Paris Commune is an example of a left-wing. It was an anarchist communism that existed for about a year or two in Paris, from about, I think, 1871 or so. It's more of a left-wing libertarian idea, that there was sort of like everyone kind of looked out for each other. But it was still in the laissez-faire libertarian. It was maximum amount of choice and no formal government. People made choices in councils and direct democracy. Okay, as you can see here, so authoritarian right, Hitler would probably be up here. Authoritarian left, Stalin would be up here. For libertarian right, Milton Friedman is an economist from the United States. He'd be who Reagan followed, so he'd be about here. He believed in individual choice, but also believed in capital right-wing ideas. Left, Gandhi, for example, would be about here. That he believed in individual choice, but the government should be control people as well. Or sorry, the government should give people individual choice. So Stalin up here and Hitler up here. Milton Friedman and Ronald Reagan probably around here somewhere, and let's say Justin Trudeau's dad, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, would have been somewhere here, probably. A libertarian who believed in freedom of choice, but he also believed in left-wing policies such as free healthcare, etc. Okay, so if you have any questions, but these are the basic principles, the next step is to finish the reading about this, and the next step after that is to take a quiz to see where you fit on this sort of spectrum.